You're listening to the Inside Commerce podcast hosted by experienced consultants James Gurd and Paul Rogers. Inside Commerce is your fast track to digital knowledge, featuring interviews with leading e-commerce retailers, industry thought leaders, and the C-suite of key tech companies to explore the latest in digital strategy, customer experience, and tech. Discover what the latest trends really mean and get practical advice based on experience to help fine-tune your e-com strategy and tech stack. Follow us on LinkedIn and reach out to James or Paul if you'd like to discuss an e-commerce project. We hope you enjoy the latest episode. Thanks for tuning in to the Inside Commerce podcast, sponsored by Centra and Greben. More about them later. So our topic today, now this is one that's come up in many conversations recently with clients and with other people in the industry, and we think it's an important one to discuss, which is, should you invest in your tech stack or reduce your TCO when looking at technology change? So the reason for this and why it's important is there's often an expectation amongst leadership teams when you're pitching for technology change, whether that's big replatforms or specific systems, that actually you can get cost reduction and cost efficiency through that change. However, that's not the primary focus and shouldn't be. Now, we're saying that cost isn't important, and we will come to that later, but fundamentally there's a big shift in outcome when you focus on value versus cost. And focus on cost excludes a focus on what the wider business goals can be and how technology can deliver better capabilities or, better speed to market, greater agility, whatever the current constraints you're facing. Sometimes you need investment to achieve that, not cost reduction, and therefore you need a business case for investment to present and get signed off. And we all know that replatforming requires detailed cost model analysis. And if we don't understand the goals and drivers for change, we don't model correctly and look at all of the cost lines impacted, including operational cost lines, including even things like resourcing. And we can undercut numbers, and we can also not look at areas that probably need a bit more investment and they should put extra costs into that. So the reality of changing technology and reducing or increasing costs is quite nuanced, and bringing leadership teams on that journey is critical to get buy-in. So we're going to focus on that today. We're going to talk about why reducing costs isn't always possible, areas where you can sometimes offset costs so you can maybe reach cost neutrality rather than increasing or decreasing. Paul, do you want to anything to add on that in terms of position, in terms of why we're talking about this today?
I don't think so. I think we'll come on to this, but I think it's probably easier than ever to reduce cost. With consolidation, with using native functionality within platforms that maybe isn't best in class, all of that kind of stuff, and stripping out a line for GA, GTM, all of that kind of stuff. But I think it's just this episode. Obviously, we wanted to cover it's the kind of balancing out, reducing the cost of the CapEx project and. Or not even the CapEx project, more the OpEx costs, or both. With trying to maximize the value of the product and set yourself up to kind of, trade the site and build the best experience possible.
Yeah, I agree. But it's also getting into the detail, because I hear too often people say, oh yes, we've got that natively. A good example would be, a modern SaaS platform with a native page builder, and it's like, yes, we can do the content management natively, don't worry, you don't need a third party. But when you get into the details, you realize there are compromises because there are limitations in those page builders, visual editors. They don't do proper publishing, and in order to do that, you either have to create a custom app on top to do basic scheduling, or you have to make a compromise in your publishing process. And often businesses can buy into cost reduction without having understood the functional implications. And actually, if they properly understood those functional implications up front, they probably would have made a different investment decision, potentially investing in a specialist third party, or build an extra contingency for development to build extra capability on top. And that's why this is why value versus cost is such an important discussion. So let's, sorry, what were you going to say?
No, I was just going to say, I think content's probably, I think that's a really interesting one, because I'd probably say if there's a scale for level of compromise, I guess it depends where you're coming from. If you've got a really solid CMS in place, I'd say that's probably slightly more on the luxury side. But the one that I see the most at the moment with the SaaS platforms, which I think, dependent on your business, is not the right way to go, is search. So a lot more people aren't investing in a third-party search solution. And to be honest, none of the platforms have a good native search solution. And I do think it's like an important area of the site and, of an experience. But also, in addition to that, the third parties, like during COVID, people were going and spending, like small retailers were spending 5K a month on a search solution. Like that, there's good solutions now for relatively low amounts of money. And I think that's a good area where it's unlikely you should compromise.
Grab and create digital flagship stores for iconic brands of today and tomorrow. We are the #1 Centra agency in the world, with more than 50 Centra implementations to date. We are also e-commerce design specialists, platform and tech partner agnostic. Try our new e-commerce design subscription. Visit grebin.com.
Yeah, and this is why this value versus cost, and that's the search emerged one. I was coming up against it recently with a native search, and the native search works. It's got some basic semantic capabilities. It's got type ahead, okay, great. But actually, when you get down to the nuance of trading search journey, then you fall down because, okay, you want to have default results where you can show default product. Oh, you can't do that unless you build some customization. You can just have basic text links. And then you realize that actually, I want to add some specific business rules. Well, you can only do very basic, like product boosts.
And I think the biggest one on that, and this applies to product racks as well, because realistically, you can get by and you can build your own solution for product racks, and you can add like basic personalization and everything else. But the biggest thing, if you're looking to trade the site in the most effective way possible, you need reporting as well, and you need to understand which products are performing well and like how you should be reacting to uplifts or reduction, like whatever else. And I think that's the thing that a lot of people lose when they're reducing cost as well.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And then the other example, I guess, in SaaS world, great APIs, great availability of data. And that is really good because you take a platform like Shopify and BigCommerce, they do have good APIs and you can pull data out, purchase data, really good depth, but you need a resource to do that. And you need somewhere for that data to go and somehow for that data to be visualized. And that either means pulling that data into a third-party reporting and visualization tool, or pick one. There are loads out there, Polar, for example, or you need to build them out in your own reporting studio. So again, there's all these knock-on implications and costs where people at face value go, that sounds great, brilliant, we've got that data sorted. Actually haven't, because it's not in the format you need to use it. So yeah, great point on that. So let's talk about the license fee one. For me, is this often comes up, is great, we'll lower your license fee, which will lower your TCO. And that's kind of smoke and mirrors, because that doesn't always stack up. And I've seen people moving from a legacy platform where they might be they have 1% of their sales, move into a lower. So you pick your platforms, Shopify, Centra, BigCommerce, that all lower license fees than the likes of Salesforce, for example. But then you've got these additional costs that come in dependent on which platform you use. So you might be able to reduce a cost on one specific line, but you've got to model out the impact on other lines. A good example of Shopify is that if you've got a payment provider across the business, it might be used for like trade, in retail, online, for phone orders, and actually the finance team have got a red line that you cannot change that is the payment provider. Then you need to use that as a third-party payment processor if supported in like Shopify, and pay a 0.2% transaction fee, which is fine, but you've got to model that in, and all of a sudden that 0.35 transaction fee becomes 0.55 in reality. Centra is the only commerce platform built exclusively for fashion brands. Over 300 fashion brands run on Centra, including icons like Paul Smith, Jeff, Avenue, and Nudie Jeans. Centra solves business logic challenges for fashion brands like no other platform, and they are on a mission to help you scale up rapidly, globally, across all online and offline channels. Take your fashion brand global, faster, further, stronger today. So there's all these nuances. Where do you normally see people like undercut costs and get caught out and surprised?
I mean, to be honest, the payment one is quite interesting as well, because I think I've had clients that have used Adyen and they've paid extra to use their fraud solution, which is really good. And then they've moved over to another payment provider as part of the build. And then they've had to pay more of a premium for a decent fraud solution, as an example. So like that's an additional cost. I think when you're talking about platform costs, like over licensing, I think I back in the day, Magento was always an interesting one where, you know, people looked at enterprise at the time or commerce or now Adobe Commerce as being expensive. But, you know, realistically, a decent host nowadays, or like even back then, like, you know, working for Vancouver, if you've got a lot of volume, you know, it's going to cost you. And I'm not saying Vancouver's not better than commerce in terms of like the infrastructure and the approach, but, you know, it's going to cost you the same. So it's like, I think it's just those nuances. And like, you know, if you are hosting it yourself, all the other technologies that you might need in other areas as well. So yeah, I think it's all of that. And then I think more modern today, like in terms of, I mean, the big one that you and I have done quite a lot recently is Centra and Shopify. And I think you're right, like the external payment provider where that's needed is a big one. And if you do need to meet a payment provider, potentially what impact that could have on like retail payments and things like that. I think that's a big one. And then I don't know too many of others. I think like when it comes to like base platform fees, I don't know too many of others. I think one thing that's going to be interesting soon in Shopify world is going to be Shopify Enterprise, which I've started to see and hear a little bit more about recently. And when that was first launched, it was launched at, I think it's $12,000 a month, something like that. It's like base price. But I think it's coming down. And I think that's an additional fee that, you know, gives you more higher API limits and, you know, better professional services and support and stuff like that. So, and that could be one in the future, potentially, dependent on how that ends up being kind of how they position that. So like say for example, I need something, it's like, oh, you need Shopify Enterprise, that could be one. And professional services in general is quite interesting. I've seen other platforms and people have moved to where it's like they have an intentional like percentage of, you know, change cost that they have targets on to sell professional services, and you do see that in more enterprise vendors. But yeah, that's probably about it.
Yeah, the other one, which is if your business model is changing, a good example, I worked on a project a while back where they were introducing subscriptions because they knew it was going to be the big growth area for them. They were moving to SaaS, they moved from open source to SaaS, but they were introduced, so they're adding a license fee there, but they're also introducing subscriptions. And if you're not used to the way that the subscription license and pricing model works, and it works differently across different providers, you know, for example, with a like a recharge, you can do a blended fee, or you can split it with a lower percentage transaction processing fee plus a fixed monthly fee. You can get that to come out lower than the overall blended fee, but you've got all these different costs that come in, and that can surprise finance teams who are not thinking they're getting a new platform for the business and there's a license and that's going to give them everything. Well, actually, no, because that's not doing this subscription piece for you. So, and I know platforms like Shopify building out like basic subscription functionality, but often that's not enough if somebody's wanted to be a more advanced subscription business. So it's really important to understand that sometimes these cost lines are going to be, the costs are going to be higher than you expect.
Yeah.
What should we talk about next in terms of this investment versus cost reduction?
I think the thing that like, when we were talking before this episode that we both thought was important to cover, I guess, is like, it's the positioning. Like if you're going to your CEO or the board with a business case for a replatforming project, realistically, the easiest message is always going to be, oh, you know, we spend X per year now, or in the next 3 years, we're going to spend X, we're going to reduce it to X. And our monthly outgoings are going to be X, and after 5 months, it's pure profit, blah, blah, blah. I think that's always going to be the easiest message. But instead of that, it's trying to basically take a budget, keep it the same, or potentially even increase it, but say, we're actually going to build a much better experience for new customers. We're going to get way more engagement with these community features. We're going to drive way more revenue per user as a result of this, revenue per customer as a result of this membership program. Like, it's like, I think it's trying to build incrementality into justifying expense beyond just reducing cost. I don't know.
That I fundamentally agree on. If you're introducing new capabilities that you can model, and there is evidence and data in the marketplace where you can say, well, look, business A was able to increase lifetime value or increase retention rates by Y. And I guess things like simplicity of introducing loyalty, because you've got the two bits. I mean, you goes what loyalty could do in terms of customer retention and lifetime value, repeat purchase rates, but also the lower cost of integrating a loyalty platform in an ecosystem that already exists. Like SaaS world, where they've got integrations with 3 or 4 top loyalty partners, versus an older platform that doesn't have the connectors you need, where you're going to have to do a custom integration. So you've got different cost lines. I'll tell you, the thing that I always advise against, and there's a lot of sales pitches out there about move to this platform and you'll increase your conversion rate. And I advise that on that pure, just by moving platform, I don't agree with. I'm seeing too many nuances in that, especially, when people say, best converting checkout. Well, I've got clients who've got like 80% plus conversion on the checkout because they are predominantly a subscription return customer business, and actually moving to a new provider is not going to have the same up. So,
to be honest, I think conversion rate, when it comes to replatforming, you're never going to have more variables. Like, that's almost like the worst KPI to look at, because the biggest one is tracking. Like, typically, if you're moving from a tech stack that you've had for a long time, it's unlikely that you've had ongoing investment in your kind of GA implementation or whatever else you're using. Like, most of the time, people are like, I have zero confidence in it. However, I want to be confident. So I'm going to rebuild the whole thing. I'm going to introduce server-side tracking across the board, et cetera. So like, that's variable one. The other thing is you're going to have probably changes to your channel mix. Like, you might turn paid off for a period of time. You might see change in SEO, Google Shopping, whatever else. Like, that's variable two. You've then got that the front end's completely changed. So I think that, I think I'm the same as you, and I've had it 3 times recently, and I would usually go to specific areas of the site and pull out, like, we're improving this. What impact do you think we could see based on previous projects in these specific areas to AOV, maybe, conversion rate or interaction rate or whatever with those specific areas? But I'm exactly the same. Like, I see so many people or brands that have said, our expectation was conversion rate would go up 20%. And it's like, that's mental. Like, that's not, it's like, that's complete finger in the water. And you've got all the variables. And then 2, it's just not how you should be looking at the project.
Yeah, exactly. And to be honest, it is disingenuous to say that simply by changing technology, like you say, the conversion rate was tied to that, because it can be tied to so many other things. The marketing mix is a classic one. The promotional mix, the product mix, fixing other things behind the scenes that have hampered your ability to convert online as well. So, yeah, and I think coming back to that investment point about this, setting the expectations, is every business is hamstrung by certain things. And that can either be technology hamstringing or resourcing, the ability to get projects over the line because of speed to market. And replatforming is a classic time when you look to solve some of those problems, and you look to solve some of it through tech and some of it through automation and better processes, and then freeing up time for the business to focus on stuff, because they're not having to, spend a day building a new page because the tool is not fit. So I think this is really important, that businesses stop and think about the areas they want to get addressed and what they need to invest in that project in order to get it achieved. And that can be through configuration, theme customization, third-party tools. And often I see this in areas like in the integrations, where potentially in the past they've got either an old middleware and it's not fit for purpose and it can't handle the data volumes, or they've got APIs that are just not working, and they want to put in a new middleware, and they want to improve the data flows, and they want to ensure that they've got the right speed of flows to process orders at the right volume during peak. And you find that all of a sudden there's another license fee in there. And the areas you talked about before, like search and merch, and then loyalty, reviews, and often, and then BI, as you said, change. And there's a lot of times when these things change over.
Yeah. And another thing that I was talking about, so I was chatting to Lewis, who we've had on the podcast before, who runs IDHL's ecom practice, whatever they call it, this morning, and this is specific to SaaS. I think when you're historically pre-COVID, if you and I went into a replatforming project, half the time there would be a £500,000 project for the budget for the build. You'd be moving to Magento and you'd say, here's a blank sheet of paper. How can we achieve the most from a functional perspective with our budget? Whereas nowadays, I think if you're moving to the SaaS platform, there's a lot of appeal to just approach all the features in a very standardized way. So use a standardized set of apps, use a set of native functionality, and from a front end perspective, approach things just as everyone does. And I think the other thing with these projects, and it's very easy to do that, and do a build for 50 to 100k, and you've got what is largely really strong functionality that's very usable and easy to manage. But like when it comes to we've talked about Nudie Jeans, we've talked about Jerfab, and we've talked about On, the brands that have got real depth behind some of the core functionality, like just community functionality, Nudie's positioning of all the sustainability messaging, and some of the depth behind that. And it's I think the other thing going into a replatforming project, particularly if you've got a decent percentage of the budget going to design, I think there needs to be if I was a brand now, I would be really thinking about, okay, these areas of the site are important to revenue. These areas of the site, are getting a lot of eyeballs and interaction. How can I build something a bit more unique? So I think that's a really interesting thing in the SaaS space at the moment.
Yeah, 100%. And that echoes a few project experiences I had recently where, I always believe that actually, unless there is a fundamental reason to go headless, you stick with the theme and you look to get the most out of it. But actually there are certain brands, and I'm talking to another one at the moment, where I can see where they really want to create an elevated customer experience, and they want to create some very bespoke customer journeys that actually a default theme is not going to cut it. You need a custom build, because otherwise and I'm in a project at the moment where we're there's some compromises being made to launch a store, and actually you get the point where you go, do you know what, we're making too many compromises, and that's when you get this whole investment piece is if you're happy to have cookie cutter, and that's good enough because you did an MVP launch, that's absolutely fine. I'm not criticizing it. Yeah, but I think some brands need to invest properly in that whole design and build process. Don't have to go headless CMS, but you can do a custom theme so you unpick some of those limitations.
Completely agree. And I think if you've got a very strict budget for commercial reasons, fine. If you've got a very strict short deadline for commercial reasons, fine. But if you're going into the project and that's just your first way of justifying, we can do this quickly, we can do this easily, we can do this at low cost, and you don't need to do that, I just think it's a bit of a waste, particularly the average brand, 30 or all of their new customer acquisition is coming from Meta. They're spending a fortune on it. And it's if you're a lot of the time, if you're trying to build an experience that for a new customer that doesn't know the brand, doesn't know the product, has 0 intent, I think that's where these are the areas you should be trying to invest in that are going to be even moving the needle slightly, is actually having a major impact if it's on a net new customer.
Yeah, exactly. And I guess my final point on this is that instead of looking at cost cutting, I advise people to think about cost offsetting and cost neutrality. That's for me is the Rubicon, and it is if you can build a 5-year business TCO model for a big technology change that is cost neutral without showing that you're saving the business money, that to me is a real plus, because you've then swallowed the upfront, and we know that the upfront year one cost, all the CapEx stuff, is heavy. And actually, when you look at the percentage, highlights flow, percentage of GMV, the spend per year with all the CapEx and CapEx and OpEx lines as a percentage of total GMV based on your target run rate. Now, what you should see by the end of the 5 years is that should be cost neutral versus your as is, but you're seeing that the percentage is coming down year on year. So actually, if you carry that through lifetime, you're actually more efficient. It's just that you had a big, heavy upfront cost. So I always start that as my principle. I don't know, how do you go into it?
I think similar, and I think it's ultimately this is like it's positioning something when you're asking for money. I mean, I guess it's purely positioning, because I think if you're, like you say, keeping the cost the same, but you got these benefits over here, which could be like you say, like more efficient use of resource, investment in brand, investment in functionality that's going to lead to more revenue per customer, etc., then I think it's more likely to be signed off. But I think that's what it comes down to. It's positioning and creating a case around return. Because I mean, the other thing I would say is, and we talk about saving money or keeping costs the same, but even then, like, so many brands should be going into it and saying, right, I want to invest 50% more because I think we can deliver X. And it just comes down to positioning.
Yeah, it is an interesting one, because if you look at marketing spend, I think this is always the challenge in businesses is marketing spend, digital marketing spend, because it's directly correlated with acquisition revenue, is let's invest. Whereas technology and related costs, and that is, support maintenance costs, retainers to push through new features, functionality, additional third-party licenses, everything that goes around this, any freelancers, contractors, is always seen as how can we reduce it? Whereas you're right, this is why we started this episode talking about investment versus cost reductions. You've got, if you're targeted with 25% growth next year, and we know that trading is tough at the moment, then you have to look to find cost savings where possible. You've got to make the investment in the areas that's going to push that. And you've got to fight for those costs, because if they're not baked into the cost model up front, it's very hard to go back to a director or a CFO and go, actually, we need another 30k because we've undercooked it and we now need to buy a new license that we haven't budgeted for.
Yeah, I think the marketing comparison is really interesting, actually. I guess a lot of this also comes back to because of the market, because a lot of people have raised money, because a lot of people have expected to continue growing when they haven't. I guess it's like so many conversations now about finance, but I think the marketing piece is really interesting, because like you see so many people, like realistically, the thing that's going to achieve long-term growth is investment in brand and new customers, but it doesn't perform as well. So instead they'll invest in like Google and, bottom of funnel, demand, and they'll see an immediate impact on some level, but you're going to see a much bigger impact long term. And I guess it's like, it also comes back to that organic search thing as well. And I think this is exactly the same, where it's like, it's not as tangible, it's harder to measure, but you've kind of got to just go a bit further to try and get data to justify it. And I think that's kind of where a lot of paid media managers are at internally now, where they've got to like go and collect more data from the industry around the impact of brand and like the halo effect of certain campaigns and everything else. And I think it's the same for this, like investing in creative, investing in, really deep functionality on site.
Yeah, exactly. So I think we kind of covered all our points. So so that we don't go back and repeat ourselves, let's just do our key takeaways. So I got 2 key takeaways from this today. And the question, our focus, if anyone can remember from the start, is why you should go into technology change thinking about investment rather than saving cost. And the 2 bits are, make sure the business case and cost models for change stacks up without having to factor in KPI uplift. So don't try and think about better conversions, higher AOV. They're harder to guarantee, as we've discussed, and there are so many other variables that impact them. Product range, competitor pricing strategy, you name it. So don't listen to the case studies out there, say by switching to platform X, you can increase your conversion rate. And then the other thing is demonstrate financial acumen by looking at where you can offset cost. How can you reduce costs? So a good example might be that you've got a large engineering team, a couple of people are due to leave. Well, actually, by pivoting tech, you don't need to replace those people because you don't need that engineering, you don't need the front-end engineer anymore, or maybe it's a reduction in back-end engineering due to a move to a particular platform type, and look at where you can timestamp cost efficiencies. So a good example of one business where we looked at 3 key tasks they would no longer have to get developers involved in because they could just do it direct on the platform, and that took time and cost out. So look at that and look at any other licenses. I had a project recently where there were 3 third-party tools we'd no longer need. They would be redundant in use that they come out. I think that really helps, because if you're going into the CFO with, we need to invest more here, being able to demonstrate that you've really thought hard about where you can take existing costs out will benefit that discussion. Those are mine. What's your takeaway advice?
I think I'm going to piggyback on yours. So I was going to talk about consolidation, which I think in the SaaS world has been a big trend, which I think you've already touched on. But I'm going to piggyback on what you've said, and basically just so, if you're trying to re-engineer where your costs are sitting, I think it's important to avoid the temptation to just approach everything how everyone else approaches it. And this is almost entirely aimed at the SaaS platforms, but I think it's just very easy to approach, like your core functionality in a very standardized way. And I think it's just as part of that budgeting exercise, instead of doing something a way that's going to be really efficient and take 1 development day or 2 development days, whatever, go and invest 20 grand in it and still, or whatever, and still kind of allow for differentiation. So I think that for me, that's like getting the most out of a budget, but investing in core functionality rather than, just kind of seeing that as a given and then investing something else.
Cool. But I hope you've enjoyed the episode. I hope it's given you food for thought. Hopefully, if you're in the middle of processes like this, it can help you tighten up your approach, your cost model and your investment pitch. Let us know what you think, anything you think we've missed and we should have talked about. And also make sure you're following Inside Commerce on LinkedIn and subscribe to our Inside Commerce newsletter. Until next week, everybody. You're listening to the Inside Commerce podcast hosted by experienced consultants James Gurd and Paul Rogers. Inside Commerce is your fast track to digital knowledge, featuring interviews with leading e-commerce retailers, industry thought leaders, and the C-suite of key tech companies to explore the latest in digital strategy, customer experience, and tech. Discover what the latest trends really mean and get practical advice based on experience to help fine-tune your e-commerce strategy and tech stack. Follow us on LinkedIn and reach out to James or Paul if you'd like to discuss an e-commerce project. We hope you enjoy the latest episode.